Right now, a bill aimed at protecting victims of deepfake and revenge porn may come with some unforeseen consequences. We're going to take a look at the pros and cons of the Take It Down Act. Also, one group of critical first responders is facing a record burnout, and it could put your immediate health care at risk. And there's a new and tasty symbol for the state of Georgia. We'll let you know what it is. This is The Take. Let's get it. Hello and welcome. I'm Chesley McNeil, and this is The Take, where we go above and beyond the headlines and we look at the why and how stories are impacting you and your community. We invite the experts in to share their take on today's top stories and try to have a little bit of fun as well. Let's get started with this. Nurses are unsung heroes in the lifeline of our healthcare system, but right now they face many challenges, including emotional exhaustion, high workloads, high levels of stress, burnout, and workforce shortages. Here now to explain more behind why this is happening is Brendan Martin. He's the research director at the National Council of State Boards of Nursing. Welcome to the show, Martin.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, let's start off with your take on how is it dire now? Why is it so dire now?
Well, I'd like to begin a little bit with, first there were some positive results coming out of our work. Overall, we did see evidence of a workforce recovery coming out of the emergency phase of the COVID-19 pandemic. And that was largely driven by a rebound among more experienced nurses re-entering the workforce following 2022. But to your point, we did see that many of the same factors that nurses have long identified as the primary drivers of their intent to leave the profession really continue into 2024. So those are understaffing, high workloads, and acute levels of burnout and stress.
Wow. So does your record show any let up since the pandemic? You mentioned the pandemic. Obviously, they were probably overworked then. Has there been any let up since?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. So we have seen a reduction by about 8 to 12% in kind of the peak of 2022 of feelings and sentiments of acute levels of burnout and stress. But I don't want to overstate that, because about 4 in 10 nurses, and this is nationwide, so about 40% of all nurses still report acute levels of burnout. And by acute, I mean weekly, if not daily.
How hard is it, Brendan, to bring in new nurses to help fill that void?
So that's one of the windows in which the nursing profession is kind of the envy of all other professions. The intake of new nurses is very, very durable and consistent. So about 150 to 200,000 new nurses enter the workforce in any given year. But what we're seeing in our survey results is that retention is just as vital. Retention of the current workforce that are experiencing many of these kind of emotional highs and lows following the emergency phase of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Nursing can be a little bit niche-y, right? You got different, arms of healthcare, that kind of thing. Where do we see nurses as a whole in 5 years from now?
From our survey, we see about 40% of respondents indicate that they either plan to leave or retire from the profession in the next 5 years, so by 2029. And a little over half of that proportion is due to planned retirement. So in many ways, that gives us a little bit of a pause as we try to determine the sustainability of the bounce or the rebound that we documented in 2024, because while more experienced nurses came off the sidelines since 2022, they're also reporting elevated intent to retire once again in the next 5 years. So
talk to me about what those changes will be, or what you foresee those changes being, as far as whether it's education or just how you bring them in. What will change?
Yeah, this is, I think, we think that this represents kind of a critical inflection point for the nursing profession. We think leaders from across practice, education, regulation, policy, et cetera, really all need to come together to address some of these longstanding issues. Many of these issues, burnout, high workloads, understaffing, et cetera, predated the COVID-19 pandemic. So to really bring to kind of the table durable solutions to address some of these issues, in particular in acute care settings, in direct patient care settings, it's vital that everybody comes together and builds on some of the early momentum that we've seen to date.
Yeah, my wife is a nurse. She runs a clinic. Hard to bring in new nurses that stay. Once they get in, it seems like the job is too hard, maybe physically on some. What would you say to her to help her out?
I'm in the same boat. My wife is a nurse of over 10 years. And we've actually seen in the past 2 years, 138,000 approximately nurses leave the profession. So I think it really will require an all hands on deck approach from all of those stakeholders to really put in place proactive policies. So those could be formal and fully funded transition to practice. That could be addressing issues of workplace violence. That could be making sure that essentially nurses feel appropriately staffed and resourced to practice to the top of their license and education. I think that there's a whole multitude of solutions that need to be brought to bear to these issues. And there's really no one silver bullet.
Yeah. One last question for you. With mental health on the rise, as far as the problems with that, you think that will have to be implemented in the training more going forward?
Yeah, I think that this is why there's so many different stakeholders that need to have a hand in this. And I think education has a role in this. You know, thinking about how we train nurses to enter into the workforce and to prepare them for, you know, potentially some of the hardships outside of just the direct patient care. I think that it's really going to take us rethinking the way that we've done things in the past and making sure that essentially we're setting the workforce to be as resilient and sustainable as possible moving into the future.
All right, Brendan Martin with Emory University, thank you so much for your insight and joining us for today.
Thank you so much for your time.
All right, take care. All right, voters in Cobb County's District 2 and 4 will elect their candidate for today for the Cobb County Commission seat. But it comes with voter invitings raising a bit of a concern over flyers that were taped to mailboxes. The flyer lists different election dates for Democrats and Republicans. It says Republicans vote today, April 29th, and Democrats vote tomorrow, April 30th. This information is false, ladies and gentlemen. Today is the election day for that special vote. All right, jury selection continues today in a disturbing case where the parents are accused of starving their son. Police arrested Krista and Tyler Shinley after a neighbor found their son begging for help. The 10-year-old weighed 36 pounds. It's the average size of a 4-year-old. Their charges out of Paulding County include child cruelty, battery, and false imprisonment. Let's take a look at the 7-day outlook for today, and we're looking at sunshine breaking out by the afternoon. We're not starting off with it, of course. Similar to yesterday, we'll start off with mostly cloudy skies, and then the sunshine comes out in the afternoon. There is a 20% chance for an isolated shower. Most of the area should remain dry. 80 will be the afternoon high today. Tomorrow we'll get a little warmer. We'll be at 83, 84 by Thursday. Both days feature a 30% chance for scattered showers. Some embedded thunderstorms could be in a few of those. And then scattered thunderstorms will come our way by the time we get to Friday. 81 degrees will be the high temperature. That's a front moving through. That will cool us down as we head into the upcoming weekend. It will be a very refreshing weekend with 78 degrees for the high on Saturday. Sunday, we're looking at 80 for the afternoon high. All right. Don't go anywhere, folks. We got much more show for you coming up after the break. All right, welcome back. Today marks 100 days in office for President Trump's second term as president. He is marking the moment or the occasion by hitting the road as what he calls a celebration. Joining us now is NBC Washington correspondent Alice Barr, who's been covering politics for years now. And Alice, the president is hitting the road. He's headed toward Michigan to celebrate his 100-day rally. How significant is this state politically, given the backlash from tariffs policies impacting the auto industry up there?
Yeah, Chesley. Well, Michigan is always an important state. It's one of the key battlegrounds that President Trump won in November, and it's no surprise, no coincidence that he is making this 100th day rally today in that state. We're also learning from Trump administration officials that he's going to roll out some announcements about reducing some fees on foreign auto parts for cars that are assembled in the U.S. We've talked about this before. Even if you have a Ford car that seems as American as it can get, some of the parts that are going inside it, even if it's assembled here, may be coming from overseas. So that's been a hit for U.S. automakers. And then he's also going to continue to have the tariffs imposed on imported vehicles, but he's making some exceptions for U.S. companies that are paying the fees to import those vehicles, that they're not going to be stacked. So like they're not going to have the steel and aluminum tariffs stack on top of these 25% tariffs on imported vehicles. So a couple of concessions for the automakers that had been voicing some serious concerns about impacts from the tariffs. And when you're talking about automakers, U.S. auto companies, you're talking about Michigan. So that's where it all ties back together.
Absolutely. All right. Immigration appears to be one of the areas that President Trump has higher approval ratings. What specifically has hit home with the voters, and how sustainable is this support?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that he ran on very clearly, very loudly throughout his campaign, and it is a big issue that resonated for a lot of voters on the campaign trail and continues to. He's been very out front with these deportations, and in a lot of polling, you're seeing that is what people believe, that he's delivering on what exactly he said he was running on. Now, in the most recent polling that NBC has put out, NBC polling is showing, it's an NBC News Stay Tuned poll, shows that 49% of Americans approve of the president's handling of immigration. So it is where he's polling higher, but it's still below the 50% mark, at least in that poll. Overall, his approval rating is underwater at 45%. So certainly for his supporters, it's an issue that is getting him a lot of traction. For instance, in front of the White House now, there are new signs that are up behind where reporters generally stand to do their live shots that have these posters of people who've been arrested, undocumented immigrants who've been arrested, and it just lists crimes, though it doesn't give any details about whether they've been convicted and so forth. But it just goes to show they're just leaning in and leaning in and leaning into this, and they do believe that it is a winning issue for them.
Gotcha. The administration is planning on rolling out new executive orders, including targeting sanctuary cities. Do they anticipate any pushback from these cities and states on these new policies?
Probably. There has already been some of that back and forth from areas that say that they don't want to go along with certain policies, some of the most hard-lined policies of, rounding up undocumented migrants. Some of the sanctuary city leaders have said that they're not going to go along with some of those things. What's different now in this executive order that is targeting sanctuary cities is that they're talking about taking away federal funding if they don't go along. So if it gets really down to the nitty-gritty of losing federal funding, how much are you going to potentially not be able to deliver on for constituents? That's when things could start to get even stickier.
Gotcha. All right. Thanks a lot, Alice. Really appreciate your insight for today, and we'll see you again tomorrow.
Thank you.
All right. The White House passed a bill on Monday aimed at protecting Americans from deepfake and revenge pornography. The Take It Down Act adds protection for victims of non-consensual sharing of sexual images. The legislation will criminalize publications of those images. It will also require social media and similar websites to have procedures in place to remove the content after a notification from a victim. The bill will now head to the president's desk for his signature. President Trump is expected to sign that into law, but some say the measure comes with some flaws. Joining us now is David Schweidel, the professor of marketing at Emory University with an expertise in AI and social media. Professor Schweidel, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
All right, let's start off with your initial take on this bill. What do you think of it?
I think the bill's long overdue. This has been a problem for several years now. We've seen stories coming out of individual states where minors have been the victims of these types of images being created and disseminated online, and they've had very little recourse. So New Jersey, I believe Texas has taken strides, but this is the first time the federal government has really stepped up, and it's nice to see that we're able to get some bipartisan support on issues that are affecting everyone.
Talk to me about the group that this bill is aimed toward. How strong of a measure is this?
Yeah, but this is a pretty strong measure, because if you look at social media platforms in general, they have not been held accountable for the content that is posted on their platforms. There's kind of a part of law that provides them with considerable immunity for what is posted on their platforms. And this, in many respects, goes directly against that, saying you are now going to be held responsible for the content that you're hosting. So it does provide victims with recourse to say, we can get it taken down very quickly. The flip side of this is going to be, how is it actually implemented? Are we going to use kind of a blunt force instrument to try to catch all of this? Are we going to have these safeguards for false reporting? It's the balance between providing the victims with the protections that they need and the argument of you're infringing on free speech.
There's some critics out there that say the takedown provision within the law will lend to abuse itself. What do you say about that?
Yeah, I think there is certainly a risk to that. I give the social media platforms, you've got some of the most talented engineers coming up with these solutions. So I do have some confidence that the actual risk is not as broad as is being made out to be. It specifically refers to non-consensual intimate images. The ability of algorithms today to be able to fairly accurately classify those images, identify images that are subject to this law, those algorithms are pretty capable today. So I don't think it's going to be as wide a threat as some are claiming it's going to be.
I got you. Talks around our newsroom. Talk about the murky part of this, the encryption, right? Because the measure doesn't exempt from private messaging, right?
Correct. It does not take into account kind of those text messaging like platforms. So if you think about something like Signal or WhatsApp, I don't believe that the law specifically goes and speaks to those particular platforms. So it's not perfect. It's not saying any digital service. It's specific to these social media platforms.
All right. We stated that the president is expected to sign this into law. Well, what kind of legal battles do you foresee coming from this law?
Yeah, I think you're going to see a period where we are going to kind of kick the tires on this law a little bit to kind of create what are those appropriate safeguards. Let's create more strict definition around those boundaries. But at the same time, I also think you're going to see this law have a significant effect fairly quickly, simply because of how common this has become as a way of really harassing people.
Gotcha. All right. Professor David Schwadel, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for your insight today.
Thank you.
All right. Take care. Don't go anywhere, folks. We got plenty more stories coming for you. This is The Take. You're watching 11Alive Plus, and we're back right after this. All right, welcome back to the show. You know, there's plenty of bills and proclamations which passed this past legislation session under the Gold Dome, but there was one in which lawmakers were able to sink their teeth into, literally. It was decided to make cornbread Georgia's official state bread. The bill's text recognized it as a singular stature in Georgia's history. Lawmakers also recognized the food history as indigenous and Native American people used cornbread to sustain themselves. Here with a little bit more fun on the states with the state symbols is Claire Haley, Vice President of Special Projects at the Atlanta History Center. Claire, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Chesley.
All right, this seems a tad bit strange to me. Why do we have state symbols in the first place? Let's start there.
Well, first of all, I can think of no more appropriate state bread than cornbread, so I was very excited by this news. But to your question, why we have state symbols in the first place. So obviously we have our more storied state symbols, things like the flags and the seal, but then beyond that, we have all kinds of other things that have been named state symbols. There's really no rules around what kind of symbols we can have or not have, but really they're seen as a way to recognize the culture of the state, the things that bring us together, some tourism benefits as well to help us be known by something, and just as a way of acknowledging the impact that all of the different types of things that are made symbols have had on Georgia and its people.
So can it come from anyone, or does it just come from lawmakers? Or do you have to, if you come up with an idea, you seek your lawmaker out and they pass it that way? Is that how it works?
Yeah, so this one in particular is passed by the state legislature. Some in the past were gubernatorial proclamations that were then passed as state, put into state law by the legislature. But the state symbols are actually codified in the Georgia Code. So since, going back to our lessons on the three branches of government, that comes from the legislature. So yeah, anyone who's watching who thinks that we need a new state symbol, definitely contact your state lawmaker and get the process rolling.
All right, so you said you couldn't think of another bread better than cornbread, right? What's the significance of elevating cornbread?
Yeah, well, better than cornbread is debatable because I'm also a biscuit lover. But looking at cornbread specifically, I mean, corn in particular, so important to the land that is now the United States. Mm-hmm. It's a native plant here, which is a bit unusual for some of our other foods, which came from elsewhere. We have records of corn being used to make cornmeal and into bread for thousands of years. Originally, most simply, just water and cornmeal combined to make food. But also more recently, things like buttermilk, even some flour and other things have been added into the mix as well. But we have a very long history of cornbread in some form or fashion from indigenous people all the way through to the current day. Gotcha.
All right. So I understand you have a quiz for me. I always fail on these things, but I understand you have a quiz for me about the symbols of Georgia.
I do, and I think you're going to ace it. So,
okay. All right.
We just picked 4 state symbols. There's a lot more than that, but we just decided 4 this morning.
Okay.
So the first one is, do you know the state nut?
The state's net?
Nut.
Oh, nut. Oh, it has to be a peanut.
Oh, okay. So this was kind of bad of us. We started with the trick question. It's actually the pecan or the pecan, depending on who you ask. So peanuts are actually the state crop, and are technically a legume, but not to be outdone. Our state nut is the pecan. named in 2021, actually.
Oh, so that was recent. No, was it was it the peanut before then?
No, it was the peanut's always, or not always been, but the peanut was named the state crop in the 1990s.
Gotcha. So it can't be two different.
On our list for a little longer. All right.
Okay. Go ahead.
State bird.
State bird. State bird. Oh, thrasher. I know that. Thrasher.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. You got it. That one's an old one, picked in 1935 by a survey of 150,000 school children who decided that the thrasher was their favorite bird.
I only knew that because we had a hockey team here called the Thrashers, and that I was told when I first moved here that was the state bird. So that's how I know that.
Yes, absolutely. All right, next one, our official state flower.
I know this. It has to be like I know it's not just a rose, but it's a certain kind of rose or something like that.
Yeah, you're super close. It's the Cherokee rose.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
Yeah, that one is also a very old one, named in 1916. Technically not a species that's native to Georgia, but has been well adopted across the state. Also a special connection to Atlanta History Center, the name of one of our archival collections, the Cherokee Garden Library, which celebrates 50 years next week.
So you're giving me credit for that one?
Yeah, I
so
think so.
I got 2 of 3. Okay, we got one more, right?
Yeah.
2 of 3. All right.
No, you're doing
see if I can
great.
tie
Okay.
it.
We've just got one more.
Okay.
And there's a bonus point opportunity here.
Okay.
So I'm going to ask you the state song, and then your bonus point opportunity is which version, like which recording of the song.
It has to be, well, it doesn't have to be, but I would say off the top of my head, Georgia by
Georgia on My Mind.
Georgia on My Mind by Ray Charles.
Yes,
Yes,
you
sir.
nailed
Yes,
it.
yes,
So,
yes.
Of course, Georgia on My Mind, originally written by some folks from Indiana, but recorded by Ray Charles, and it was that specific version in 1979 that was recognized by the legislature as being the state song of Georgia.
Well, I didn't think I would get any of these right. Wow. So, I mean, symbols, very important, obviously, and as you said, brings us together. I'm going to use some of these, Claire, in my next party or something, maybe win some money.
Yeah, there you go. And there's many, many more to choose from. So next time you're, bored and need something to do, check out that Georgia code and see what else you can find.
Real quick, do you know off the top of your head what's the most obscure, besides cornbread now to me, what's the most obscure symbol?
The most obscure state symbol?
Yeah, to you.
Oh, that's so hard. I don't know about the most obscure, but I would say my most delightful surprise was the state dog, which is the adopted dog, which I thought was just really, really sweet. Nice.
Very, very nice. All right, Claire Haley, thanks so much for joining us today and sharing that insight and educating us today. Really appreciate that.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me.
All right, take care. Don't go away, folks. Coming back with my final take. You're watching The Take, and we'll be back right after this. You will be able to get some vitamin D today, as we'll have some sunshine, especially by the afternoon. Only a 20% chance for an isolated shower. The chance for showers go up, and our temperatures will be going up as we head through the rest of the week, and then cooling off as we head into the upcoming weekend. It's going to be a nice weekend around here. All right, now for my final take. Don't look now, but former and current NBA stars are taking new positions on the college and university level. Shaquille O'Neal is the latest to return to the college ranks as he agreed to be the general manager for Sacramento State men's basketball program. Atlanta Hawks Trae Young and Golden State Warriors Stephen Curry also agreed to be assistant general managers at their former schools. And you may be thinking this is a case of the rich getting richer. Well, not so fast. Yeah, some have been commenting about that on social media. These positions are voluntary, which means they don't get paid at all. Of course, there is some incentive. Trae Young, Steph Curry, it's a way to give back and bring some awareness to their former schools. And for Shaq, well, it's a way to get closer to his son, who transferred to Sacramento State from his former school. So this is a good thing, folks. Don't be so quick to judge. That's all we have for you today. Thanks for joining us. Make it a great day and try to encourage someone today. Pat them on the back or something.